The Battle of Naboo was a turning point in galactic history. Though few saw it at the time, it was the beginning of the great triumph of the Sith and the end of the great peace of the Republic. Among the many effects of this battle was the development of the Cis Droid Army. The Trade Federation and the droid makers it contracted learned a lot from Naboo, and over the course of the next decade, they improved their droid army in accordance with these lessons. The Trade Federation and the droid makers it contracted learned a lot from Naboo, and over the course of the next decade, they improved their droid army in accordance with these lessons, forming the Cis Droid Army as we know it. But what if the Trade Federation or their suppliers hadn't learned those lessons? What would the Clone Wars have looked like? In this video, we'll be answering those questions.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
For the sake of simplicity, we're only going to be looking at the Trade Federation Droid Army today. There were many other private forces that made up the CIS Droid Army, including the Techno-Union Army, the IGBC Collections and Security Division, and the Commerce Guild Punitive Security Forces, to name a few. However, we know little about how those forces changed after Naboo, or even if they existed before Naboo, so we're going to be ignoring them for the sake of this video. At the time of the Battle of Naboo, the Trade Federation Droid Army was simple but effective. It utilized B1 battle droids as its foot soldiers, occasionally employing droidicas, specialized B1 variants, and the occasional prototype droid alongside them. STAPs served as reconnaissance vehicles, while MTTs and PACs served as troop transports, and AATs served as armor. All of these were carried into the battle aboard C-9979 landing craft, which were usually escorted by vulture droids and deployed from Lucrehulk-class battleships. Everything we've just listed was operated by a singular central control computer, which was present aboard a specialized droid control ship. Many elements of this army actually remain the same through to the Clone Wars in the real timeline. All of the vehicles listed above remained in use, and their usage went unchanged, though the merger with the other droid armies meant that new craft were added to the SEP roster alongside them. Of course, B1 battle droids also remained the primary foot soldiers of the army, and central control computers actually remained in use as well, though they were used a bit differently. So what changed? Well, first and foremost, Naboo made the Trade Federation realize that maybe depending on just one central control computer for a whole army wasn't the best of ideas. During the Clone Wars, Separatist forces still used central control computers, but they also gave their droids independent logic modules so they could operate independently as well. Secondly, and more importantly perhaps, they added a few new units to their roster to fill in some of the gaps. On the ground, this meant the development of the B2 Super Battle Droid to beef up the droid ranks, and in space, this meant the development of core ships and Providence-class carrier/destroyers. The CIS Navy actually might have been fine if it had only Lucrehulk-class battleships. Those battleships were actually really versatile, and while the resultant fleet would definitely have been worse off for a lack of warship diversity, the Republic Navy suffered from that anyway, so it would only have really leveled the playing field. The Confederacy also wouldn't have had such a dramatic numbers advantage with only Lucrehulks, but again, it didn't really need to outnumber the Republic Navy 4-1. The CIS Navy wouldn't have been nearly as effective a fighting force as it could have been in this alternate timeline, but it still would have been better than the Republic Navy for most of the war. The Droid Army, on the other hand, would have had a harder time, though perhaps not as hard as you might think. The continued reliance on central control computers would have been the biggest hurdle, as you might expect. The Battle of Naboo taught the whole galaxy something that probably should have been common sense. Don't have your entire military slaved to one central brain. At Naboo, the CCC acted as a great big self-destruct button for the whole operation, and once Anakin Skywalker pushed it, the battle was lost, even though the Trade Federation had been on the verge of victory. Now, contrary to popular belief, central control computers were actually a great idea for the Trade Federation Droid Army. As we've mentioned in past videos, the Droid Army's strength was its collective nature, and the CCCs were a big part of that. They coordinated entire armies at once, allowing ground forces to act with the sort of cohesion that only Jedi battle meditation could rival. This is why the CIS kept using CCCs after the Clone Wars. They really were useful when used properly. Of course, the Trade Federation didn't use them properly. They opted to rely solely on these computers so that they didn't have to pay for droid brains, a rather grievous error. As aforementioned, this only presented the enemy with one big target to attack to win the Battle of Naboo. They didn't protect their CCC all that well at Naboo either. Central control computers were housed aboard specialized droid control ships, which were basically just Lucrehulks with extra hardware slapped on. This in itself isn't a bad thing, but the Trade Federation made a mistake in withdrawing the rest of the blockade after the invasion and just leaving the control ship out in the open. Couple that with the fact that the Trade Federation didn't bring a backup CCC to Naboo, and you can probably see the huge tactical oversight there. Now, the Republic likely would have had a much harder time exploiting this weakness during the Clone Wars, when the CIS definitely wouldn't have left their droid control ships alone like that. But we're all quite familiar with the sort of hijinks Anakin Skywalker and some of the other Jedi got up to during the war, and they probably would have exploited the hell out of central control computers anyway. Like the heroes in Saturday morning cartoons, the Republic probably would have defeated the Confederacy in the exact same cheesy way in battle after battle, and the CIS probably wouldn't have fared well for it. The other major problem the droid army would have faced is a lack of B2s. The B2 Super Battle Droid was a hugely important component of the CIS droid army, making up for the relative weaknesses of the B1. If the Trade Federation never bothered commissioning B2s, however, the ground battles of the Clone Wars would have been a slaughter. B1s were pretty good battle droids, but clone troopers were considerably better fighters, and the Confederacy would have needed to lean hard onto its numbers advantage to win anything ever. This likely would have had an interesting side effect. The Confederacy would have developed the Trade Federation's prototypes more. The Trade Federation droid army brought a number of weird and obscure droid models to Naboo, some of which were scrapped after the battle and some of which served as the basis for later droid models. The latter was the case for the E4 Baron Droid, a Trade Federation unit that was the direct predecessor to the B2 Super Battle Droid. The E4 Baron Droid was a product of Bactoid Combat Automata, a marked step up from the B1. The Trade Federation bought a bunch of them as top-level security units for Newt Gunray and other leading officials, but they proved effective enough that Gunray considered employing them as assassins too. During the Battle of Naboo, these units were called into action in Theed and in the Gungan swamps, where they served in two roles. Firstly, they acted as heavy infantry, much like Super Battle Droids later would, and secondly, they routinely went on search and destroy missions, rooting out scattered pockets of resistance. Like B2s, Baron Droids were much more durable than the standard B1s, and they were equipped with built-in dual repeating blasters on both arms. They were quite strong, and they also had a limited degree of independence from central control computers. You know, like all battle droids should have. Additionally, they had very powerful sensors, capable of seeing motion heat, energy, and sonic waves as well as visible light. Their photoreceptors doubled as powerful floodlights, which they often employed in Naboo swamps and in the tunnels under Theed. Aside from these last two features, they were pretty much slightly weaker versions of the B2. Baron droids would have filled the hole in the droid army left by the B2, and while Baron droids weren't nearly as good as their successors, they would have done well enough. In this timeline, the lack of advancement in the droid army actually wouldn't have significantly affected the Confederacy's performance in the Clone Wars. The CIS would have still lost the war, of course, but they wouldn't have done so by a larger margin or anything like that. The effectiveness of the droid army would have decreased, but honestly, not by much. So that's our take on what the droid army would have looked like if it had remained the same after the Battle of Naboo. But what do you think? Would you like to hear more about the formation of the droid army? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. And just before that Star Wars algorithm sucks you deeper and deeper, I propose a bit of a change, a bit of a shake-up through our new channel called The Braved. We go through all different eras of history to find some of the most badass individuals from these eras. Very high quality videos, and we post once a week, so make sure you check that out. And if you just want to vibe to some beats, check out our Relax Jack music channel, where we've got some awesome music and some awesome visual effects that I think you'll all love. And if you want to join our behind the scenes Discord, where you can chat to myself and the other team members who work on this channel, as well as access to some exclusive content, then consider donating to our Patreon. And if you just want to join the wider community, check us out on our GGN and our Geetsly's main Discord server. Anyways guys, as always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.